Dialogue Ireland, talk number 1, Dr. Sean Collins, October 2001.
If you don't, please wave. There's no relationship, by the way. We're just two Collinses, just by total coincidence. I thought I was being called Father Collins earlier on, which would have been an interesting phenomenon. I would go along totally with the concept that's just been put out that an open-mindedness is going to be very useful for us today to explore. I mean, the traditional image of Christ is with his arms open, not closed. So, and who am I to say that? I wanted to just go through a little bit of who I am, why I'm here, what qualifies me to even have a comment here. The only things I know about Tony Quinn are, one, I've heard tapes, I reviewed tapes for RT as part of their program, or for channel or TV3 as part of their research. I've met clients, I work as a psychotherapist and as a counsellor, so I've met clients who have come out of his organisation and who have also clients who worked within his organisation as part of the structure. So that gave me a little bit more information. I've also read his magazine Blueprint, which has been pushed through most of our letterboxes at some stage. The conclusions I come to are that Tony Quinn started out a long time ago with the intention, I suspect, of doing good. What did he set out to do? He set out to teach people exercise. He set out to teach people about nutrition. He set out to teach people about how to use their minds more effectively. Something happened along the way. That was not all bad. So it might fit with Father Collins' concept that let's start out with an open mind and look at both the so-called good things and the bad aspects, and to consider them in how they balance up against each other. He introduced people to the idea of group support. When people work with groups or become involved in groups, what do they get? Because it fulfills a need in some way within them. They get to become part of a community. They get to have some sort of a shared dream or vision. So it does actually do something for them. These are not fools. Of the people I have met who've been through the Tony Quinn system, these are not stupid people. These are not naive people. These are ordinary folk just like you or I. Some might be a little naive, some are very, very intelligent. And that creates a confusion in our minds. What exactly is going on? We're also going to be looking at the possible dark side of what goes on. And what qualifies me here is that my field of both study and experience for the last probably 15 years of my life has been hypnosis, trance, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. These are aspects of how do you use the mind better, and hopefully I will attempt to explain how people like Tony Quinn may create an undue influence on people, and more importantly how they can stop this influence having a negative effect. I've done in my time somewhere about 10,000 hours of one-on-one work. So I've a lot of experience with people. I don't think there's anything new that I'll ever hear. I've done approximately 1,000 hours of group work, working with groups like this, even though I'm scared of public speaking and I'm nervous. But that's called being human. My primary of interest is in what's called psychosocial or behavioral medicine, which is working with people who are dealing with life-threatening conditions and seeing are there ways that we can influence the progression of their disease. So I know a little bit about the field, but I'm not an expert, so I won't be telling you anything. I'll be hoping to have you maybe ask questions in your own minds. Another point, anything can be used for good or evil. We saw a huge example of that in recent weeks, where jet aircraft, which normally do a wonderful job of bringing us from A to B, were used for evil. Surgeons do an extraordinary amount of good, but sometimes they do evil. Doctors do a lot of good, but sometimes they do evil. Priests do an enormous amount of good. Sometimes they do evil. This is not anything that you don't already know. But so to start with a concept, anything can be used for good or evil. And I had a discussion with a Jesuit friend of mine a week ago where I asked him, did God invent sin? He was appalled. He said, what do you mean, did God invent sin? So I went on to say, did God invent free will? He said, of course, everybody knows that. Did God introduce the concept of free will and choice? Because unless you have evil to contrast against good, how can you have free will or free choice? Now, we could get into a long debate on that, but the point I'm making is that very often the contemplation of evil is what triggers us to do good. Very often when we look at appalling pictures on the television from Rwanda or wherever else in the world, it provokes us to actually put our hands in our pockets and bring some money out and attempt to do something worthwhile. So evil, the contemplation of evil, is often what enables us to have free will, to exercise free will and to do good. People get a little bit obsessed about whether Tony Quinn has qualifications, yes or no. I'd make the point, whether he has qualifications or doesn't, the reality is there is an effect. Something is happening. It's observable. So we need to be asking ourselves the question, what's going on, and how can we understand it, and how can we perhaps protect ourselves from a dark side and look for whatever good might be in there. I'll start off with my pet area of expertise. What is hypnosis? What is trance? Because this is often raised in relation to Tony Quinn. A definition of hypnosis is an altered state of awareness in which the unconscious mind becomes open to suggestion. Not necessarily programming, but suggestion. An altered state of awareness, in other words, the person is not asleep or anything like that, in which the unconscious mind, that automated part of our minds, is open to suggestion from an external source or from ourselves. If I use Freud's old traditional model of an iceberg floating along in the sea, conscious mind, the thinking part of the mind, is up at the top. The research would suggest the conscious mind can actually only keep track of 7 plus or minus 2 things at the same time. There are only so many things we can think of. The unconscious mind can keep track of vast amounts of information. Until I mentioned it, you weren't thinking of your phone number, I assume. But it was there somewhere. So the unconscious, in effect, works like a library of everything you've ever experienced, everything you've ever learned. You can be walking along the road just thinking about, where you're going to, what you're going to do, and a thought can float into your mind of maybe being a child and, being on holidays, or, thoughts are constantly floating up out of this library into conscious awareness. Now, we also have what's called a critical factor. Let's make a man today, that when a suggestion is offered to you, in other words, comes into your conscious awareness, if I propose to you this morning a new hypothesis, the world is flat, your conscious mind receives this incoming information, the critic telephones the library and says, hey guys, what do we know about the world? Back into your thinking comes pictures from space and Hubble space telescopes and things like that. So patently, the information that comes into awareness will cause you to reject that suggestion. So when untruths, mistruths, obvious mistruths come our way, we basically dump them, just ignore them and say, that poor guy, he needs, perhaps he should go and see a therapist or be incarcerated somewhere. We are constantly, in the course of our day-to-day lives, going through this information coming in through the senses, where we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, feel. This information is flowing in and constantly being evaluated against everything we've ever experienced. Now, there's a phenomenon that occurs in the presence of strong emotion. Now, what's an emotion? Fear, anger, sadness, guilt. In the presence of an extreme strong emotion, this critic, in effect, goes out to lunch, disappears. It's like the security man on the way in here. He evaluates each of us, or should, as we're coming in here. He's checking us out. If we look suspicious, if we're carrying a machine gun with a beret, he may sort of say, this doesn't look right. In the presence of extreme strong emotion, anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, this critic can, in effect, go out to lunch, and we can accept into the unconscious beliefs, expectations that have no basis in reality. The best illustration of this would be someone who's phobic of spiders, for instance. Now, I'm assuming none of you have met any killer spiders, but a phobia of spiders is not an uncommon thing, or of mice. When did you last see a killer mouse? But so what I'm illustrating is that this library of everything that we've ever learned can receive input data which actually makes no sense at all. Now, fortunately, in the normal course of events, we have this critic. Now, working as a therapist with hypnosis, I will seek to create a relaxed body. RB stands for relaxed body. I'll guide a person through some sort of relaxation exercise. I look to create a relaxed mind, in other words, a tensionless mind, where I might have the person associate into imagery from the past, something that they enjoyed in the past, that was pleasant. I will, in the process of that, be seeking to create a strong emotion. That's what the SE stands for. And I will then offer suggestion. So relaxed body, relaxed mind, strong emotion, and suggestion equals powerful programming. Now, what we're interested in here is, that's using hypnosis for therapeutic purposes. When people go into a mass environment, an example would be the Bernadette McAllister, Devlin as she used to be called years ago. Some of you have grey hair, so you might remember these mad groups of people running down a cobble street, being whipped up into a frenzy, doing things that as individuals they wouldn't do. So when people go into a group, they frequently set aside their normal values and, act like animals. If you look at some of the so-called leaders back through the world, I was watching a program Australia on Mao Zedong last night. Some of you might have seen it. Here's a man who develops the ability to influence a fairly large group of people by his, cultural revolution talks and everything else. In no time at all, he has a group of followers. The group of followers then work their way into a position of power. They then create fear in the rest of the community, and in no time at all, you have, in effect, almost one person controlling vast numbers of people. At one stage, he controlled, I believe, somewhere about a fifth of the world's population. One man. What came out afterwards was that he had a dark side as well. Adolf Hitler, was he any different? Did someone like Hitler fulfill a need in society when he arrived? The German people were disillusioned, depressed. There was financial depression. There was collective emotional depression. He came along and said, be proud of being German. There's the person who's responsible for what's wrong in your life, and follow me and we'll get to the promised land. And once they had created this core structure, it then spread out, and then in effect they created fear in the rest of the community. I mean, who's going to kick the system if you get to take a long train trip? Nobody. And we see elements of that sometimes in groups, such as the Tony Quinn organization. You're either with me or you're against me. Some of his infrastructural people that I have met who began to question the collective mindset, in effect, got discharged out of the system. Now, I only know some examples of that, so I may be wrong on that, but just to keep an open mind on it. But just to recap, all of you have a conscious mind, I'm assuming. You have this library of everything that you've experienced. If I go to this person and I put my hand out, what does she do? She puts her hand out. She looks confused for a moment and saying, why is this maniac coming up and shaking hands with me? But what I was doing was floating a challenge into her conscious awareness. Here's an incoming hand. And the library says, oh, I know how to deal with that, and put the hand out, even though there's no logical reason why we should be shaking hands at this moment. So a lot of what we do is essentially automated. If it wasn't automated, imagine if I was sitting here attempting to speak to you, deciding, where do I put the verbs, adjectives, predicates in my sentence? Might my flow of speech be slightly challenged? Or in fact, what do I talk about? And then I decide whether I use verbs, adjectives, or predicates. So most of what we do is automated, which is useful, that's good. What we do need is this critical evaluation. Now, in evaluating the tapes that the Channel 3 people gave to me, what I was listening for, what are the language patterns that this man uses? Because we can use language to influence people. If I do this, here's a letter, and here's two other letters. Here's another letter, set a blank space, and I put down some other letters. What your mind does is it begins to explore. Why would you go blank ... ex? And what does blank UCK mean? And then if I put in the letters H and the letter L, what do you see? The word hex and the word lug. Did anybody think of any other possible words? I'm sure. And these Helen surroundings, definitely not. But the reality is, when we're looking to make sense of things, quite often our prejudice and associative capability will start filling in the blanks, and it'll be premature. Now, what Father Collins said at the beginning was, beware of jumping. It may be the other words that you were thinking of, or it may be what I actually wrote here, which is hex and lug, two totally innocent words. Now, looking at the language patterns, if I say to you, don't think of a blue tree, am I controlling your minds? Were you successful? Anybody here not think of a blue tree? There's no such thing, but all I have to do is to use a particular language pattern, and I can actually force you to think about what you didn't want to think about. There are probably about 50 different language patterns that have been extracted from the work of Milton Erickson, who is one of the founders of modern hypnotherapy. He was a psychiatrist. I know from listening to Tony Quinn's tapes that there are huge numbers of sophisticated language patterns being used that you wouldn't even notice. That the average man in the street, but they do influence. J. Krishnamurti used to start his presentations. He was an Indian teacher of years ago. He'd start all his teachings by saying, I'm not a teacher. I'm not going to teach you anything. What's he secretly saying? I am going to teach you, and I am a teacher. But in a very clever way, he fools the mind into believing that the superficial truth is what's actually going on. So all I can say to you is that I know, and anybody who is trained in this area will know, that Tony Quinn uses a huge amount of sophisticated language patterns to influence the groups that he's with.
Is that conscious, Sean? Deliberate, or is it unconscious?
He may be doing it unconsciously, he may be doing it consciously, I have no idea. But I do know that he is actually using them, and using them in a very clever way. It may be just that's the way he is. Does he create, remember I talked here about, in the presence of strong emotion, we're very open to accepting suggestion without our normal critical evaluation, the free will. The free, if someone asks you to do something, a new task, what does your mind do? It flicks between what will happen if I do, and what will happen if I don't? That is the normal nature of mind. What's the best that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? The mind is supposed to oscillate between two possibilities for a period of time. If someone asks you to go on a holiday to Greece with them, what's your mind instantly going into? Well, the weather will be nice, but can I stand this person? Have I got the time? Do I have the money? So the mind will go on what's called a transderivational search, or an exploring of weighing up the alternatives. On the one hand this, on the other hand that, on the one hand this, on the other hand that. And that's how the mind actually will work its way towards a conclusion of some sort. One of the mistakes that we make in life is that when we come to a conclusion, we think that's it, we're done. The mind is actually supposed to keep asking, keep challenging. That's what the free will I mentioned earlier on is about. To talk for a few moments about this concept of, does do people like Tony Quinn use strong emotion? Did Bernadette Devlin use strong emotion? Yes, she whipped up things that people wanted to think about. You know, any of you who go to a football match, are people experiencing strong emotions? Depending on which side of the field you're on. You know, when there's a score, you see people go into, you know, almost ecstasy on one side and profound depression on the other. In the presence of strong emotion, we're open to suggestion without critical evaluation. In evaluating the tapes, I was hearing, first of all, relaxation sessions, where people would be invited to sit down and to go inside and go into some sort of relaxed, open mode. Then they would be invited to focus on the life of their dreams. You know, this notion of this phrase kept on coming up again and again and again. The life of your dreams. You know, like, hallelujah, heaven is going to be available on earth. At the peak of that strong emotion, once it's whipped up, I was hearing very, very clear-cut suggestions as to what they should do, how they should act, etc. What's puzzled me through the years, and people I have met who have been on, let's say, some of these seminars abroad, 15 grand's a lot of money, isn't it? I mean, I question if I have to spend 100 quid, 20 quid. But 15 grand is like way, way out there. If I spend £15,000, I experience a strong emotion. I've met some of these people socially at parties as clients, and I'll ask them, because I'm an inveterate investigator, I'm curious. So you've been away for a week, fortnight, whatever, with Tony Quinn. What did you learn? It's not that you know, someone comes back from their holidays, you're going to say, what was it like? Who did you meet? Who were you with? Where did you go? When any of the people that I've met who've been through this Quinn experience, none of them could give me a specific response. All of them, virtually without exception, were saying, it's fantastic, it's brilliant, you really have to go. You have no idea what it was like. Yeah, but what did you learn? Well, you know, what was special about it? Did you learn special techniques or have special experiences? No, it was absolutely brilliant, unbelievable. And I'm going, yeah. And I'm wondering why they can give me no specifics. If Father Collins comes in and says his few words at the beginnings of today's presentation, do I know what he said? Yes, I do. I have a fair idea what he was on about. Someone spends £15,000 and goes abroad, and they come back and they can't tell me what happened. I begin to go inside and just be a little curious, and I'd invite you to consider the same. Another aspect that deeply, deeply disturbed me was the incredible focus on success. Incredible focus on you can only succeed. Now, I say to myself, what needs are met by the likes of Tony Quinn and groups like his? The things that came up were insecurity. This is an insecure world. We get born, we slide down the birth canal, we get handed to amateur parents who muck around with us for 15, 20 years, and then we go out there and we're supposed to flounder and make sense of the world. If you buy a washing machine, you get what do you get? An instruction manual. We get one of the most incredibly sophisticated processors in the world, the human mind and the human body, and we're supposed to try and figure out how to do it on our own. That's very difficult. And we're also confronted with the reality is, hey, you've just been born, but you're going to die. That's a little disconcerting. We spend a lot of time running away from the fact, to think about that stuff. I've spent a reasonable amount of time with people who are actually going through the dying experience, and it is extraordinarily like the birthing experience. There's an inevitability, an unstoppability about the moments before, during, and after death. It is like a birthing. I was with my own father about 5-6 years ago, and I could not believe the parallels between that experience and watching one of my sons being born years before. So there's an inevitable set of events set in place, and like it or not, the one thing you're guaranteed is you're all going to die. But we don't like to spend a lot of time thinking about that. The people who flew into the World Trade Center knew they were going to die, but they put a particular spin on it. kill myself, and I go to the promised land in their version of the word. So what needs are met by Tony Quinn and groups like him? Dealing with insecurity. This is an insecure word. You're going to die. Anxiety. Trying to live up to the expectations of others. Be amazed for myself as a therapist, how many people are trying to please people or meet the expectations of people who are actually dead. Someone's going through this. I want to. I'm still trying to please my mother. How is she? Well, she died 5 years ago. And I'm going, huh? So these are like automated, trying to meet the needs of others. Guilt is a very interesting emotion in that it's the only emotion that I know of that's not observable in the animal kingdom. Anybody know why? Guilt. Sure nobody here. It's a favourite in Ireland, but I'm sure none of the people here have ever experienced it. But the reason animals don't feel guilt is that they lack the ability to self-observe, to have self-awareness. They just do their own thing. Domestic animals, I have a little dog called Buster. Does he know about guilt when I come in and he's chewing on one of my slippers? Or the cat when you come in and he's rooting around in the fishbowl? They know how to experience guilt, but only because they've learned it from us. But you will see anger in the animal kingdom, sadness. A mother animal loses her cub or whatever. Fear, hurt, but you won't see guilt. Guilt comes from this self-observation aspect of us. So anxiety, why are people anxious? Because they're afraid. They're anxious they're afraid that, I won't make a success of life. You get gray, you wake up one day and you find out a wrinkle here and there, gray hair, and you say, God, I never fulfilled the hopes and dreams I had when I was 20. When I was younger, I planned to be both Pope and a frogman. The Pope bit looked great because you got to be carried around by other people with the white socks. That looked fantastic. And the frogman, because there was an element of excitement in it. Fortunately, I've given up both ambitions. As far as I know, I have anyway. Fear of the future. In working with patients who are terminally ill, one of the things they greatly fear is making plans for the future. One of the first things I like to do, if someone, let's say, has been given a 2 to 3 year life expectancy, is to have them make a 20-year life plan. Why would I do that? That's a very insulting thing to do, isn't it? But if their unconscious mind has bought into a belief system they're going to die in 2 years, guess what happens? Walter Cannon, many years ago, the man who named and discovered the fight-flight response in humans, was fascinated with voodoo death. He was intrigued as a doctor that you could have a young person, young man, young woman, who would come into the hospital or the clinic with a conviction in their minds. These are in primitive societies, but a conviction, a belief in their minds that they were going to die. And no matter what they did, most of the time these people would die. So he put his finger on, beliefs and expectations can become self-fulfilling. Now, one of the reasons people are afraid of planning the future is, one, in case it does happen, and they'll have limited themselves. And on the other side, they're afraid that it won't happen, and that they'll feel disappointed. There's an old cliche that an optimist is someone who believes this is the best of all possible worlds. True? An optimist is one who believes this is the best of all possible worlds. The pessimist is the one who believes that he may be right. And so fear, anxiety, insecurity are part and parcel of who and what we are. We look for all kinds of ways to try and deal with that. Anxiety about death, anxiety about career, anxiety about relationships, anxiety about our children. So these are a normal part of being human. Along comes a group who arrives with bags of sugar, who begin to ease the anxiety. It's nice to be part of a group, a shared vision. We're all in this together. We can get excited. We can make pictures in our minds of magnificent things happening in the future and get really excited about them. An interesting aspect of this model of the mind is, to the conscious mind, this is Saturday morning, somewhere about 10:45, and there is only this moment. You've a little bit of a sense of maybe leaving home this morning, maybe anticipating the coffee. But to the conscious mind, time is now. To the unconscious mind, all time exists concurrently. It all exists at the same time. You can feel rotten about something that happened 10 years ago, and you can feel rotten about something that's 5 years in the future. True? You don't have to wait. In looking at organizations, any group, and by the way, I would include churches in this. Churches are a benevolent aspect of the phenomenon we're talking about. It's nice to be part of a community, isn't it? You know, you go to Mass, it's nice to sing the songs, to have a common vision of the future, God, Christ, heaven, all of these things. We don't like to think about the hell thing. I'm not sure if hell has been eradicated yet, but there are lots of people trying to get rid of it. But we actually need the contemplation of hell to give us an incentive towards heaven, I believe anyway. And by the way, nothing I speak is the absolute truth. This denial of possibility of failure, the mind is supposed to oscillate. As I said, anything that you contemplate doing, the mind is supposed to be bouncing back and forth and considering what is probably the best thing for you to do. And eventually you come to some sort of conclusion. So it just basically oscillates back and forth, back and forth. If you block this system, if you begin to contemplate, I can only succeed. Anybody here ever put a bet on a horse? Yeah. So you come along and you say, do I know much about horses? No, I don't. Will I put all of my life savings on it? No, I definitely don't. The potential loss would be too big. I've got a good tip, I'll put a fiver on it. You know, if I lose it, it's no big deal, and if I win, this is fantastic. If I begin to enter a warped mindset where I said, there is only success, I can only win. Anybody ever met a compulsive gambler, problem gambler? Are they oscillating gracefully between I might win and I might lose? No, they're oscillating only in the side of this spectrum that says I can only win. And they go on to develop major problems. In reviewing the tapes of the tapes that I was asked to evaluate, that was a theme that came through. The life of your dreams, a room full of gold, everything is going to be fantastic, and there seemed to be little or no consideration of the possibility of failure. And that to me is the eradication of free will. If God came along and at the beginning of time, and I suspect God, rather than the traditional image in the metaphor that's used in the Bible, for billions of years, we were evolving from the time coming out of the slime, but somewhere along the line, we stepped above the animals by developing a cerebral cortex, which gave us this capacity for self-observation, for looking at ourselves, which was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing in that it enabled us to move forward, a curse in that it brought in the introduced guilt into our lives. Mr. Quinn, when he encourages a person to begin to think only in a one-sided way, using the technology of hypnosis, then you can end up with a person who has a distorted worldview. I've also been intrigued with the people who have been through the Quinn-type system, that a lot of the time the people can only talk about Tony. It's Tony this, Tony that, Tony's water, Tony's vitamins, Tony seminars, and it's like the rest of their lives got lost somewhere out there. So this aspect of, in effect, jamming their oscillator, their inner mental oscillator, on one side is not useful. Pope John was very interesting in that he came along and said, why don't we step into the shoes of the other churches? Just for a moment, we don't have to accept it, we don't have to embrace it, but let's step into the minds of the other churches. I love them. He had just such a delightful fatness about him and an expansiveness. But he basically sowed the seeds of openness of saying we don't all have to rush out and become Muslims, Protestants, anything else, but what we can do is step into the other man's shoes and look at the world through his eyes to seek to understand him. When you come up against very prejudiced organizations, fundamentalists, it doesn't matter whether they're left-wing or right-wing, are very, very uncomfortable people to be around. I think even the Catholic Church, and forgive me if I comment here, fell into a little bit of missing the message for a while when evil happened, rather than bringing it out into the open and addressing it and saying, sin has happened here, an attempt was made to hide it under the carpet. A one-sided oscillation was taken. We are priests, we're the church, so we cannot do wrong. And guess what happened? Huge tragedies. I knew some absolutely superb, excellent, loving men who as priests went into the priesthood with a wonderful vocation, a desire to do good in the world, but who ended up having to leave. I've counselled a surprising number of priests and nuns through the years, which for an old-fashioned agnostic like myself are. My left brain, by the way, is agnostic. My right brain absolutely believes in God. Just to confuse the issue. I oscillate constantly between the two poles. I consider there may be a heaven, and I will do my best in the world to get there. And on the other hand, it may be like the light bulb, maybe it goes out, and I will never know. This is called mystery. If I cease oscillating between the two, then I'm not being true to my human nature, which is to look at the full spectrum of possibility. Now, excuse my comments on the churches, they're well-intentioned. If you block a person at one end, you've created a distortion, and all the evidence observable from the tapes that I've seen, from the newspapers that I've read, from articles that I've read, would suggest that there is a huge polar emphasis and that trance and hypnosis are used to consolidate these in people. Do I have the capacity to kill as a person? Yes, I do. If someone came along and said, if you take this pill, you lose your capacity to ever kill anybody, I say to myself, would I want to take this pill? And then I envisage in the future, I'm in a bank with my son, and we're drawing money out, and by coincidence, I just happen to have a gun with me, and there's a bank robber there who says, I'm going to kill your son. I'm sorry, Mr. Bank Robber, aloha. So I need to have the capacity to kill, but I choose not to exercise it in my day-to-day life. I don't want the eradication or the elimination of free will, open, expansive thinking, or choice. It's embedded in our human nature, it's embedded in our churches. Even as I understand it, the Muslims would share this, even though they might call us infidels once in a blue moon. Many of the churches that we have experience of have this openness of mind. Some of the other compulsory celibacy was an interesting, I'll raise a slightly controversial aspect. I believe it was the Council of Trent where it was introduced. I don't remember anywhere reading that Christ had suggested that priests should only be unmarried. Now this is probably heresy in these hallowed walls, but I believe this concept of choice also is there as a possibility. The enforcement of a celibate, only single priest's mindset, which is supposed to be slightly related to property, inheritance, etc. But this created a distortion and caused otherwise apparently very good men to act in very weird and bizarre ways. I'll just put that out as an idea. It's not, I'm sure Father Collins will have something might have something to say on that later on. So if we're attempting to say what's good and bad about organizations like Tony Quinn, they're very good in that they meet a need in people's lives, which used to be filled by the church, community organizations, etc. The reason people become involved is so that they can feel more secure, less anxious, happier in their lives. Do organizations like the Quinn organizations do bad to everybody? Absolutely not. I admit, I was coming across town with a colleague of mine, and she said, you know, these people probably have a distorted way of thinking to begin with, or something along those lines. She'll attack me later. I said, not necessarily, because if I go through the various people I have met who've been through the Quinn system, many would say, I got a lot out of it. It was really good. I've left it behind, but I got a lot out of it. They are not stupid people. They're not naive. They are, I think quite a few of them are quite open-minded people. It's the vulnerable ones who have a very high degree of suggestibility, a very high degree of openness, without even, because they've never studied this type of stuff, how the mind works, how unwanted suggestions creep in. They're not actually in a position to make informed choice as to whether they will buy into the beliefs being presented to them or not. So therefore the risk is that they buy into it. One of the joys I have of teaching people about trance and hypnosis, and there's a limited amount that I can do in 45 or 50 minutes, is that you never need to be vulnerable again. Advertisers, if an advertiser wants to sell you a bar of a flake, for instance, do they put a box up on the square, in a square on the screen and say, eat a flake? No, they show you a girl in a bath, which is associated in the mind with leisure, relaxation, pleasure. The bath is leaking. I've never quite figured that out, or overflowing. But advertising uses this concept of creating strong emotion or desire very, very effectively, and they suggest, nobody actually says, go and eat a flake, but there is an implication there. The people, leaders like Adolf Hitler, Mao, and I'm not suggesting that Tony Quinn is the same as these people, what they do is they tend to use associative conditioning type processes. If I say, I don't know, Guinness is, finish the sentence. Good for you. I just throw in two words and your mind automatically reaches into calls up the library, says, what's the end of that? The answer comes up, good for you. So what Guinness have done is created an association in your mind between the words Guinness is and the concept that it's good for you. I know of no study published in a peer-reviewed journal that has ever evidenced that Guinness is actually good for you. But the suggestion is there. And because it's not a big deal, we accept it into the psyche. People in world cult-type organizations who refuse to see the other view. Some of you may have had the experience of attempting to argue or discuss logically, dialogue. It's interesting that Dialogue Ireland is the name of this organization that we're here with today. Dialogue is conversation from both sides. It's actually a discussion. It's not a dictatorship. It's dialoguing. When the dialoguing stops and you're just being told things, you tend to get into trouble. If I say to someone, if I want someone to relax in working as a therapist, I start out by using words like, I don't want you to relax too deeply or too soon. Why would I say that? Why would I say to someone, I don't want you to relax too deeply or too soon? Because I want them to relax deeply and I want them to contemplate how soon are they going to relax. I presuppose that they're going to relax, just like I presuppose that your hand would come out. It's not, am I controlling this lady, by the way, or was I controlling that lady or influencing her just for a moment? You bet I was. When I said to you, don't think of a blue tree, was I influencing you? Was I manipulating your brains? Yes, I was. And if someone studies this type of technology, and it is technology, it's how the brain actually works, they can actually influence people in lots of ways that, and you don't even see what's going on. It's like the sleight of hand. I brought along, just for fun, a simple compass that any of you have ever done any hill walking. What do? You say, I'm going to go walking in the hills today. You get your little map, you get your compass, and you go out, and somewhere along the line you find that you're a little lost. So what do? You can see a tower up on the far hill, and you can see a forest way over there. Now, with that information, the compass and the map, can you actually find out where you are? Yeah, you just take a bearing on that, have the two lines cross on the map, and now you know approximately where you are. So you can begin to plan for the future. You can decide, where do I go next on my walk? Now, if I bring along, as I'm doing my map reading, this is a little pocket dictaphone, little miniature dictaphone, but in the front of it is a speaker. But what's interesting about the speaker, and I probably don't have, I do. In the speaker is a magnet. As you can see, the coin just sticks to the speaker. If I'm carrying this in my pocket, and I'm doing my map reading here, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to get false information. Now, true north, up on the North Pole, there's a lump of rock floating around. It doesn't float too much, but it does float a little bit. Called the North Pole. Maybe it's not a rock. And that, because it's consistently in the same place, can allow me to navigate in the world, to know where I'm going. But if I introduce some sort of distortion in the shape of some sort of attractor, like a magnet, I'm actually going to get false readings. But for any of you who've ever done sailing at sea, this can be very, very worrying. Because if you're out at sea, and being at sea is an interesting way of describing it, but you're at sea in the world, you're uncertain, anxious, fearful. You look to your charts, your maps, and you look to your compass. And what you haven't noticed is that someone left a winch handle just beside the compass. You may well end up in a place that you didn't want to end up in. And my suggestion is that organizations such as Quinn's have a potential to distort or to create false influences in terms of you navigating your way in the world. This is a complex world. It's frightening. I mean, one of the things I love to do is collect emotions. You know, some people collect rocks. I collect emotions. I think I have somewhere about 350 or 400 positive emotions, 350 or 400 negative emotions. I'm really obsessed with this. How many of them have I not experienced? I don't think I don't think that I have not experienced any of them. The point I'm making, obviously, is that emotions are part and parcel of being human. You know, that's what's, you know, is being furious or in a rage the same as being slightly miffed? No, one is, the other is exasperated, whatever. And yet they're both parts of the same spectrum of the same response, which is, you know, becoming angry to a given event. But you have this whole, you know, we have within us like a paint box. Remember when we were little, you get a paint box with all sorts of different colors. Free will suggests that we can use every color in the box. I do not want to work with a painting box that has most of the colors blocked off with a big plastic shield over them. I want to have the freedom, and that's what came from God, that's what came in our nature, the freedom to choose which colors will I use and in what sequence. I can still choose to just paint in blue, but that's my choice, that's free will. But if someone comes along and begins to insidiously slide in covers on some of my paints, my little blocks of paint, so I can only begin to see the world in one particular view, the world of Hitler or Mao or, dare I say it, but I won't, but I will, Tony, or whatever, then the world begins to develop a skew. You know, Christ taught the concept of openness. He did not teach, he loved the enemies, he taught loving your enemies, but he loved hanging out with sinners. As a child growing up, I used to sort of say, wow, this is really weird. This man is preaching, you know, the Ten Commandments? As a child, as a small child, I used to wonder what coveting your neighbor's wife is. I'm 7 years of age, and saying, wow, that sounds great. And adultery, whoa, let me make a note of that. And then you grow up and you take these beliefs on board and you begin to oscillate with them. Sometimes you get it wrong. and Christ loved sinners. He didn't love the sin, he loved the sinners, as Father Collins was saying. Someday someone is going to give me a picture. I desperately would love a picture of Christ wrecking the temple. Why? Because it showed his inherent humanity, that there is not just one way. Was he actually teaching us that anger is appropriate, forgiveness is appropriate, that there is a spectrum of what it means to be human? And I'm running outside my brief at this stage, and we're on about a 3-minute bell, so coffee is getting closer, I promise you. Group mind and individual mind, I commented on that. When a person is part of a group, you here this morning are members of a group, but for the moment you're still quite fragmented. You don't know what sort of people are here. You know, there may be people in this group who have totally closed minds. Tony Quinn is bad. You may have other people who believe the world is Tony, and I'm here to check it out to see, you know, what sort of heresy is going to be preached here this morning. And in between, you've got this whole spectrum of, you know, is there good in the guy, and is there potential bad in the guy? Is there some sort of evil going on? So if I were to attempt to sum up, which is difficult to do, I started with the idea of everybody in the audience got a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. Normally, we have critical judgment that evaluates all incoming information and puts it into the la-la category or accepts it. Once something is accepted into the unconscious, the mind is very, very reluctant to let go of it. How many people here have never had to try to break a habit? Well, eating too much, smoking, not tidying your office, whatever. Well, these are just habits. You know, some people oscillate into fanatical tidiness, don't they? Never, their desk is like you could eat your lunch off it. Other people, they live in chaos. Which is right? Neither is right. We need to move between the desk being a total mess and hitting critical mass and then getting in and tidying the whole thing up, and then begin to make the journey back into chaos. So we move between chaos and order on a constant basis. But if someone only operates in one side, either in chaos or in order, they're not being human. They're not authentically being human. So what I have identified, and my field of expertise, is hypnosis, the mind, psychology. That's my area of expertise. All I can say is I have identified clear language patterns, systems, ways of influencing the group using this group mind that may well serve other purposes as yet unidentified. We don't know. My second concept is taking the words from Christ. He gave us free will to oscillate between the two. He did not create evil exclusively. He created evil, perhaps, to enable us to know and to move towards good. Without the existence of evil, it would be impossible for us to exercise this free will that he gave us. He was not saying, go in there and do bad things. I'd be moving well outside my brief if I went forward. The last comment. Any relationship is made up of two people. Myself, Father Collins, he's looking at his watch, he's saying I'm the chairman here, we should be moving along. I'm the speaker who's looking to squeeze in everything I can get. So we're having a relationship even though we haven't said a word. Well, we're having a relationship. You guys are out there saying, you know, is this poppycock or are there threads here? Very often we learn things that we don't know the meaning of. A week ago I started a class with giving each member of the class a piece of a jigsaw. 20 pieces, child's jigsaw. And I asked them to guess what was in it, in the envelope that they got, and then to take it out and look at their piece of the jigsaw, and to guess from the piece that they were looking at what the final picture was like. One guy was very fast. He said, Cinderella, I see a slipper in the air. But I then asked him, would you bet £1,000 on it? He said, well, I'm not that certain. Now, the reason I use the jigsaw is, as we go down the road of life, we pick up little pieces of the jigsaw along the way, or we find them. Sometimes when you look at them, you don't know what the final picture is or where that piece of the jigsaw is going to bring you. But if you just shove it in your pocket and never look at it again, you're going to have a problem. If you collect the different pieces as you go along, and you begin to look for patterns and connections, and begin, as you go down the road of life, to assemble your own personal jigsaw that someday life will actually mean, you'll discover what this life is about. And you'll be successful. But if you leave the bits of the jigsaw along the way and say, I'm not going to look at jigsaw pieces, I'm not going to look at jigsaw pieces, you may miss the whole plot. So some of what I say may not make sense to you yet, and some of it may only make sense in the coming weeks, months, or perhaps in the light of what other speakers say today. But this sense of being open to the mystery, open to the curiosity, there is no one out there who can tell you, does God exist? Is Tony Quinn right? Whatever. We can only oscillate gracefully between the two. Is life predictable? Sometimes. Is life unpredictable? Sometimes. That is natural. This is the nature of life. Okay, 2 minutes for questions. If you're not totally confused, right, down for coffee. Someone says, don't ask me a question.
You mentioned that there was an incredible focus on success in the Tony Quinn movement. And I'm just going to ask you about that. Given that life has a habit of bringing us face to face with our limits and our limitations, and that in a sense it's quite difficult to sustain the notion that I am successful. I suppose I'm asking, what strain does it put people under to have to live under the umbrella of success in a life which is constantly telling you, that there are limits to what you can do?
When we come out of school, one of the things, let's take just this concept of wealth. When we come out of school and we grow up and we leave home, maybe go to college or whatever, we're faced with, I'm supposed to be working towards developing independence, maybe getting a wife, children, developing a life of my own. We're supposed to, we start from poverty, in theory, and one of the things we need to move towards is wealth, because we need no money, no fun. No money, no income, you don't have a life. But there is a point of enoughness, where notionally, if we keep going up this path of wealth, what we end up with is being wealthy and miserable. I spent almost 10 years of my life living in California, about 7 years of my life living in California, where you have possibly the highest concentration of wealth in the world per capita, per 1,000 people. I think every 10th person was a millionaire, when being a millionaire meant something. A more miserable Sherry I never met in your life. Many years ago, I had a young lad working for me who lived in a council house with his 12 other siblings. They didn't have a penny. There was never a spare bob anywhere. They'd even rented a house, the attic of the council house next door. There were children accommodated, unknown to the corporation, in the attic of the house next door. They broke through. And if I was to say about quality of life and contentment, happiness, they were very contented family. Didn't mean they were unhappy or happy all of the time. They moved between the two. If I look back on my life, three years ago, one of my sons was killed, just coming up to his 21st birthday. And I remember about 2 or 3 months afterwards going to my GP, because I was feeling a bit down in the dumps. And he said, have you been feeling depressed? That's an interesting question. And I said, do you know, yes, I have. But it was only driving home, as I was driving home, that the other side of this oscillation came to me. I've also been happy. But if I begin to oscillate only in the area of unhappiness and misery, I'm not going to win. Now, to get back to your question, which I've successfully evaded perhaps a little, is that there is a point of enoughness in wealth. But if you blind a person if you have a person think only on wealth, accumulation of money, success, power, then what they do is they find themselves out here wandering in the wilderness when they might have made a turn and begun to explore meaning, family, religion, the arts, sciences, personal
Idolatry.
Sorry?
It's known as idolatry.
Idolatry is a gorgeous way of putting it. But the problem is that you get stuck on a path which is not useful. And this sometimes, to make the turn, is turning to what Scott Peck called the road less travelled. To contemplate that there is not just this one road in front of you, but that there are other shades of, or other colours in the paint box. Is that in any way?
I think we'd be better, because of the coffee and